Welcome to today's Wildlife for Lunch. This is Courtney Britton with the Texas Wildlife Association. Today's topic is deer nutritional requirements and implications for management. Our guest presenter is Dr. David Hewitt, the Stuart Stedman Chair for White-tailed Deer Research, research scientist, and professor at the Cesar Claiborne Wildlife Research Institute of Texas A&M University in Kingsville. The Wildlife for Lunch series is made possible through funding provided by the San Antonio Livestock Exposition, Inc., and it's hosted by the Texas Wildlife Association and the Texas A&M AgriLife Extension. Dr. Hewitt, I'm going to go ahead and pull your presentation up and get you the presenter ball here. And your mic is live, and you're now the presenter.
All right. Thank you, Courtney. Really appreciate the invitation to come talk with everybody here today, and obviously for a noontime seminar talking about nutrition and what deer need by way of nutrition can be a timely topic. So I want to start by pointing out that, nutrition in some ways may seem relatively simple, but when you start thinking about what a deer is really trying to do and interact with its environment, it seems like it could get pretty complex pretty quick. And so if we think of a deer like the one shown here in its habitat, this deer is going to go out and forage, and it may eat dayflower, some dayflower leaves or mesquite beans, grand henio berries. There's all kinds of different foods that the deer is going to focus on while it's in its habitat eating. But deer don't have requirements for mesquite beans. They don't have requirements for grand henio leaves or forbs per se. What they're really doing when they're out there foraging is trying to get chemicals from their environment to meet their own needs. And so deer do have requirements for protein, and they have requirements for carbohydrates and all these other chemicals that they need. Another thing that deer is trying to do while it's foraging is trying to keep from poisoning itself, because a lot of these plants have toxins in them. If you think of coyotillo, for example, deer rarely eat coyotillo, and there's a reason, because just like it could do to us, coyotillo can kill a deer if they eat too much of it. So when we start looking at it from this standpoint, things kind of get a little more interesting when we're thinking about what a deer is trying to do when it's meeting its nutritional requirements. What we're going to be focusing on then is this idea of deer getting chemicals and energy from their environment. And the reason this is important is because those chemicals and energy are used to keep the deer alive for its own metabolism. They're used for the deer to grow, like the fawn in this picture is, we are going to hope it's going to grow up to be an adult deer. And then nutrition is also important for reproduction. So really a lot of the different aspects of management that we might be interested in are going to be influenced by nutrition. The first thing to recognize when we are going to start talking about deer nutrition is the deer's anatomy. A lot of people may come from a livestock background, and some of these terms are going to be familiar, but deer are not just little cows or or skinny sheep. Deer are different, and it's important to realize why. The first thing to realize is that deer are ruminant, and what this means is that deer have this large part of their stomach called a rumen, and then they've got some other parts of the stomach complex, a reticulum, an omasum, and an abomasum. And these different parts are important, particularly the rumen and the reticulum, because they hold microbes. And these microbes can help the deer in a number of different ways. They're going to enable the deer to digest plant food that it couldn't otherwise. So plants are made up largely of cellulose, and animals, vertebrate animals like a deer, don't make the enzymes to digest cellulose, but microbes, different bacteria and other microbes can digest that cellulose, and the deer gets some benefits from that. Another really important thing that the microbes in the rumen do is they can synthesize vitamins and specific amino acids, which are what proteins are made out of, that enable the deer to meet those needs. So you'll never see a requirement for B vitamins, for example, for a deer. And the reason is because the microbes make all those B vitamins for deer. That's a huge difference between us and deer, for example. But mentioned deer aren't just little cows. So deer are different from cows, and it's pretty easy looking at this picture to see this great big huge fat cow here, and and then the deer's body. Deer have a much smaller rumen than do a cow and even than a sheep or a goat. And so what this means is the food doesn't spend as much time in the rumen, the microbes don't have as long to digest it, and that means deer need higher quality food than do a lot of our traditional livestock species. So deer are considered a concentrate selector, meaning they're going to eat the higher quality foods in the environment. And as a result of that, deer have a much narrower muzzle than does, say, a cow. And so deer are going to be able to get in there and grab those little high quality leaves and fruits and things like that, whereas a cow isn't going to be nearly as selective. It's going to have to kind of take the good with the bad when it's foraging. Talk just a little bit here about some of the specific nutrients that deer need: energy, protein, minerals, vitamins, and water. Energy is pretty easy to think about when we look at this little fawn running here. It's obviously burning energy, and we can relate to that. But energy is really needed for a lot of other aspects of what deer do. Even a deer bedded down and sleeping is still going to be using energy, because the cells need energy to support all their processes, and really just to stay alive, an animal is going to be using energy. So this kind of maintenance energy requirement, we might think about maybe about 3,000 kilocalories per day for a doe, and maybe up to over 4,000 kilocalories per day for a buck. So that's the amount of energy that a deer is going to need, really, just to kind of stay alive and meet its foraging requirements and those types of things. Protein is another nutrient that the deer need, just like all animals. And really, a deer's body is made up of protein, from the antlers and the hair, the meat. Those are all real obvious to think about as having protein in them. But really, all the cells in a deer's body are made up of enzymes and other things, all of which are made up of protein. Proteins are chains of amino acids, and these specific amino acids are what deer need from their diet. Maintenance requirements for protein for a deer, about 8 or 9%. So it's not nearly as high as you might think about if you're looking at the tag on pelleted feed, for example, but those feeds are designed for more than just maintenance requirements. Another class of nutrients that deer need are the minerals. So minerals are inorganic substances that are used for a variety of purposes in the body. Calcium and phosphorus obviously have some structural purposes in the bone and antler. They're the primary components of antler. Enzymes, many minerals, particularly some of the micronutrients like copper and zinc and iron, may be co-parts of enzymes. So for the animal's metabolism to work, they need these minerals. And some minerals, like iodine, may be part of hormones in the animal that are important for the functioning of that animal. And again, we've got some macro minerals like calcium and phosphorus that are needed in relatively large amounts, and then some others that are needed in small amounts like copper and zinc and iron, for example. Not a lot is known on mineral requirements for deer, other than perhaps for calcium and phosphorus. And if we look at maintenance requirements for those, maybe about 0.2% of the diet of calcium and 0.17% of the diet of phosphorus can meet the maintenance requirements. Vitamins for deer, like us, deer do require vitamins for all kinds of different parts of their metabolism. Many of these vitamins are also parts of enzymes, and so if the vitamins are missing, there may be some specific deficiency symptoms that would show up. Vitamins come in two different types. We have the water-soluble vitamins, which are a lot of the B vitamins and vitamin C, for example. And then we have fat-soluble vitamins. The fat-soluble vitamins are vitamin A, D, E, and K. And these vitamins have a variety of kind of different characteristics, but one that's important for our purposes right now is that the water-soluble vitamins are all made by those microbes in the rumen. So when a deer is going out to forage, it doesn't need to worry about water-soluble vitamins. When we're trying to provide food for deer, we don't need to worry about those. Vitamin K can also be made by the microbes, so you won't need to worry about that. Vitamin D, animals can make from exposure to sunshine, so we don't need to worry about that. So really, vitamin A and vitamin E are the two that we'd need to worry about. There's very little known about vitamin requirements for deer, so generally if you're going to provide some vitamins, vitamin A and E would be put in the food, but again, not a lot known about exactly how much would be needed. So a lot of times we might need to refer back to livestock requirements to figure out how much of those would be necessary. Water is an essential chemical that animals and deer need from the environment. The requirements for water can vary tremendously depending on the environmental conditions, the temperature, for example, and the productive state of an animal. But maybe between 1.5 and 3.5 quarts per day might be what deer would consume, especially in kind of a maintenance situation, and that might go up and for a doe that's producing milk, for example. So another important idea or kind of concept when we're thinking about deer nutrition is that deer don't need to meet their requirements every day that they're out there foraging. They can make use of some types of foods, for example, when those are real abundant. You might think of acorns in the fall, and so a deer could eat a whole bunch of acorns when they're abundant, and that extra energy that's in those acorns could be stored in the fat, and that deer can use the fat at a later time when energy is not available in the environment. Same thing can happen with muscle, for example, where protein could be stored in muscle, and an animal or a deer could store protein when it's real available, and then be able to use some of the protein in its muscle or even in its liver, some of the organs like that, when protein's deficient in the environment. Bone is a huge source of calcium and phosphorus. So when a buck's hardening out his antlers, he doesn't have to eat that amount of calcium and phosphorus every day that he's putting into his antlers. He can use some of the calcium and phosphorus from his bone on those days where he can't find enough, and then replace that calcium and phosphorus in his bone at a later time. Liver's a site where a lot of the vitamins can be stored, and so again, deer can kind of integrate these requirements over longer periods of time. So with that in mind, we want to be able to provide the right nutrients at the right time so our deer will be productive and can meet our management objectives for them. Might think about 3 different seasons in general. Spring and summer, particularly summer in our environment, is a time of high productivity. Bucks are growing antlers, does are finishing up gestation and giving birth to fawns and producing milk, and so really high requirements for protein and energy and minerals during the summer. If we think about energy requirements and maybe think about them in how much they increase during the summer relative to maintenance, this doe here who's in late gestation, you can see she's a big round butterball. She's got probably a couple of fawn fetuses in there that are going to come out at any day. Her requirements for gestation may be 50% greater than they are for maintenance. Where really the peak energy requirements of any deer at any time of the year happen, though, are when that doe is going to be producing milk for those twin fawns. Her requirements may almost triple, 270% increase in her requirements over maintenance. And in fact, does usually can't eat enough food to meet those energy requirements, so they need to use some of their body fat to make up that difference. Fawn growth, their requirements may be about 50% greater over maintenance when they're growing. Antlers, not a lot of energy on a daily basis is needed for antlers, maybe about a 15% increase in energy requirements for antler growth during the summer. Protein requirements, remember they were 8 or 9% for maintenance. Growing fawns and yearlings, maybe 10 to 12% protein. Gestation, about 12%. Again, lactation is really the peak requirement, not only for energy but for protein, so 18% protein may be necessary for a doe to meet those lactation requirements. Antlers, 10% is enough. Antlers grow over a long enough period of time that there isn't a big increase in the daily requirements to meet that antler growth. Minerals also go up during spring and summer because of this high productivity. So again, had these mineral maintenance requirements for calcium and phosphorus that you see on the slide there. Down below, we've got requirements for late gestation. Calcium, maybe 3 grams per day, which if translate to the amount of food that the deer are eating, may come in around about half a gram or 0.5% of calcium of the diet per day, so doubling over the maintenance requirements roughly. Phosphorus, roughly a doubling as well during late gestation. Lactation, it's got something kind of weird going here. The requirements are about the same, but if you look at the percent of the diet here, we're down to less than we had during gestation. We're down to about 0.3% of the diet needing to be made up. There we go, of calcium, and the phosphorus requirements are similar. Seems weird that they need about the same amount, whether they're in gestation or lactation, but the requirements went down. What's happening is when a doe is lactating, she's eating a lot more food, so she can get the same amount of calcium, but the concentration in the diet can be lower. If we look at antler and body growth for bucks during the summer, these requirements really aren't all that different than they are for maintenance, but one of the reasons that's the case is, again, during the summer, the bucks are eating quite a bit more. So we've got requirements of actually a little bit less than they were for maintenance, but because the bucks are eating a lot more in the summer, they can actually get by in a little lower concentration. So a lot of this nutrition stuff, there's some things that are kind of counterintuitive. Deer also have other ways that they can meet their mineral requirements using things like mouse skeletons and snail shells and chewing on antlers. These are all ways that deer can get calcium and phosphorus and other minerals from the environment that the plants may not be able to provide. And so making sure you've got a healthy ecosystem out there that can provide some of these other components can also contribute to the antler growth and fawn growth of deer on your property. Moving away from summer and spring, these times of high productivity, fall, the kind of primary thing that's going on in the fall is that animals are recovering from lactation, the does are, and getting ready to go through the winter, and the bucks are getting ready to go into rut. And so increasing body fat is particularly important. Does are also getting ready to ovulate, get ready for the breeding season. And if those energy requirements aren't being met, that can influence whether or not they'll ovulate and may influence the number of fetuses that they'll have. So energy comes out being particularly important in the fall for this body fat, and also to help the does be in good shape for breeding. So maybe a 50% increase above maintenance. Some of the fawns in the fall, they're still going to be growing, so they'd still have a higher protein requirement than they would need for maintenance, maybe 12%. During the rut, we've got bucks that are losing large amounts of weight, and you might think, their energy requirements must be huge because they're out chasing does and running around and doing things. Some of the work that we've done, and you look at the amount of energy that's released from the fat that bucks lose during the rut and the amount of movement that they do, and that movement may account for about 1/3 of that extra energy. What is really going on that causes these bucks to lose weight during the rut is they quit eating. So they don't necessarily have high energy requirements, but they definitely need that body fat that they put on in the fall so that they don't have to spend time eating. They can go out and spend time looking for does and tending does and doing the things they need to do during the rut. Winter, post-rut period, really deer are primarily in kind of a holding pattern at this time. They're trying to maintain their body, and does may be gestating, but there's very little growth of the fetuses that occurs at this time. So really, winter can be a maintenance requirement, a maintenance period. So maintenance energy, maybe slightly above to allow some of the animals to recover, for especially bucks that have lost condition over the rut. And 8 or 9% protein can meet the deer's needs at this time of the year. So we've got a little bit of introduction to the nutrient requirements and how those change through the season, and talked a little bit different about bucks and does and fawns. And we're looking at a picture here right now that has 3 animals on it. We've got, looks like a relatively mature buck, an adult doe, and we've got a fawn. We might think about what the nutrient requirements of these animals are right now. based on the size of the fawn and the hard antler on the buck and the fact that he's kind of expressing an interest, has his nose down low to the ground following that doe, you might guess at the time of year we're looking at right now is during the rut, and you'd be right. The picture was taken in early January. And so what would our nutritional requirements of these animals be at this time of year? If you think about that, this buck's requirements, if we think back to what a buck's doing in the rut, it might not even be eating much. So it really may not matter what food's out there. If there is some good quality stuff, it's surely going to eat it, and it will eat some during the day, but food isn't the main thing on that buck's mind. This doe, she's going to need you know, a little higher energy, make sure she's in good shape, although her body condition looks pretty good. So, and so her requirements, protein requirements, are going to be probably pretty close to maintenance. This fawn could still be growing, and if it's on a high energy diet, it may even cycle. It looks like it's a doe fawn, so it may be in a position where it could be bred this year. It's still going to be growing, so it's going to have higher energy and protein requirements. So for these three animals at this one time a year, they all have their own requirements. Might make things even a little more confusing. These are two different bucks that I happen to know are the same age, in part because they're part of our captive research herd here in Kingsville. These two bucks may have different energy and protein and mineral and vitamin requirements, even though they're the same age. The buck on the right has a little larger antlers, so that could influence its requirements. Just like two people of the same age and the same sex, you could feed them the same amount of money, and one person, same amount of money, you may feed them the same amount of food. One person could lose weight, another person may gain weight. So individuals, even of the same sex and age, can have different requirements. So this whole idea of nutrient requirements starts getting kind of confusing. They can change seasonally. They differ between males and females. They differ between ages. So fawns have different requirements than, say, yearling or young deer, which are going to have different requirements than mature deer. And even individual deer can have different requirements. And to make things even more confusing, which really should make us all take our hats off to deer managers, is that the habitat's changing through time. You know, every one of you has a place where you spend time in the outdoors, and you'll have seen these exact same scenes that I can show you in these next couple of pictures. But out near Carrizo Springs, it's August 2006, so does have fawns on the ground right now. This may even be peak lactation. That's a rough-looking environment to raise fawns in. The exact same place a year later. Wonderful-looking place to raise fawns. Spring 2010, remember wistfully back to those days, and there's Forbs and green stuff all over. Picture the exact same place in spring 2011. You know, about as bad as you can imagine it looking. So, we've got requirements changing for deer seasonally. The requirements differ by sexes, ages, and individuals. We're trying to manage the whole herd. The vegetation's continually changing. How in the world are we going to manage deer nutrition with all of this variation going on? There's really only one answer that I can think of to this, and that is to let the deer figure out what they need, and if we give them enough choice, the deer can find what they need to meet their requirements. And there's increasing amounts of evidence, and really if you think about it, there's really no other way it could work, that animals do need to be able to select a diet that meets their needs. And that's a reason that bucks select diets that are different from does, and fawns are going to select a diet that are different from adult deer. And so given that these requirements are changing you know, in all these different ways amongst different animals and seasonally and all, allowing the animals a choice so they can meet their needs is probably the key thing. So you might want to be managing your habitat to provide forbs, for example, you know, in the understory or on the ground. Grass may have a role, as I'll talk about here in a little bit. You know, different browse species, which may be important not only for the leaves they have, like the Grand Henyo and in the center of that box, but also for the berries they produce. Mesquite beans and prickly pear tunas also can be critically important. Acorns in places where oak trees are prevalent. So this diversity allows deer to go out and select the different forages that will enable them to meet their needs. So if we think about all these different classes, forbs can be important because they're typically the higher quality foods in the environment, moderate to high in digestible energy, and also tend to be relatively high in protein amongst all the foods that deer may have access to. Forbs in general also have lower in toxins than some of the other forages, and so that makes them also a preferred and high quality food. Our problem is that even though forbs are preferred, they're usually sporadic, and those pictures that we looked at just a second ago made that really clear, that forbs aren't always available. So if you only manage for forbs, you might be leaving your deer real hungry at other times of the year, or in some years when we don't get rainfall. So browse, another option to help provide choice. Browse tends to be moderate in digestible energy and digestible protein. Tends to be moderate, and some browse species are even relatively high in toxins, which can limit the amount that deer can eat. But the benefit that browse has is it's always available. Even if the leaves aren't on browse, the deer can still be eating the twig ends, and those twig ends can be pretty high quality as well. Another forage category that people outside of places where there's oaks don't often think about, in South Texas, get out in that brush and it's kind of hard to think of mast. That is the fruits and pods and berries of plants as being an important food source. But a lot of the work we've been doing is really emphasize the importance of this mast. And so by keeping browse in the environment, not only are you getting the leaves and twig ends that the deer might eat, but you're also making available the Grand Henio berries and the mesquite pods and even the seeds in Guajillo here can be important for deer. They'll eat those. Mast is typically high in energy. Many mast species are very low in protein, so they're not an ideal food by themselves, but they can be really good. They're also usually relatively large and abundant, so the deer can harvest lots of them quickly. Our problem with mast is kind of like forbs, is they're often real sporadic, certainly only seasonal, and then in some years, you may have very poor mast crops as well. What about grass? Because of the small rumen of a deer, they do very poorly on mature grasses and in fact eat very little grass. But when grass is really young and tender, like shown in the picture here of this grass after a fire, that can be really high quality food. And the rye plots and things like that people put in as winter food plots are another example of grass being a high quality food that deer will really focus on. So grass may have a role in this idea of providing choice to deer to enable them to meet their requirements. So we got these requirements varying in all these things, all these reasons, seasonally and ages and sexes of deer. The nutrition, the vegetation is continually changing. One thing that you might think about if you're trying to manage is you might say, well, shoot, maybe, that's all kind of interesting, that diversity stuff and everything. Maybe, though, I ought to really manage for those couple of key preferred forage species that are really going to be the very best for the deer. So maybe you want to take that approach. There's a number of reasons why I think that could be very difficult to do. One is it may simply be hard to select those preferred species. A lot of the food habits type work we've done shows that deer diets are really complex. Over the course of a year, deer may eat over 100 species, and some species they may eat multiple parts, the berries and the leaves and the twig ends from just Grand Henio, for example. And then a lot of the foods, different foods are in fact, are less than 10% of the diet. So it might be hard to go in and say, I'm going to manage for that one preferred thing, because there really isn't something that's dominating the diet. And then some forages are maybe highly preferred, but they're just real seasonal. It can make it hard to manage for that. And to give you a little sense of what some of these real seasonal forages may be, I'm going to share with you a little bit of data that we've got from a research project that we've been doing out near Carrizo Springs, out in the western part of South Texas. And this project has involved raising some deer, doe fawns in particular, so that they're comfortable around people. And we put a radio collar on them, and we've taken them out into the field and released them in some 200-acre enclosures. These enclosures have a high fence around them, and so the deer are limited to that 200 acres, but we release them in those 200 acres with a radio collar on them and allow those deer to just go live in there, and they wander around and over the months figure out what's good food, and over the years, you know, learn the seasonal patterns. And because they've been habituated to people, we can go out and watch them eat and learn about, you know, some things that that deer eat that may be really hard to detect in the feces or in rumen samples. We can do this at times of the year outside the hunting season, for example, so we're not having to rely on just rumen samples of hunter-killed deer. One of the things that is real intriguing from some of these studies is that twisted acacia is a prominent plant out there. And the deer will eat the leaves, you know, especially in the spring, you know, when they're kind of newly growing and stuff. But generally, twisted acacia isn't viewed as a real good forage plant. Until we were out with these deer early in the spring and noticed them walking from one twisted acacia plant to the next. And what they were eating were these kind of growths on the plant that were a result of a fungus or kind of a rust getting in that plant and causing this big fleshy growth. The deer just loved those, and they'd walk around from one twisted acacia plant to the next and eat up those, you know, eat those up. But it was only important for maybe 3 weeks in the spring. And so if you went to manage for this, which was a highly preferred food, they'd be gold. Your deer would be gold for, you know, 3 or 4 weeks in the spring, but the rest of the year it'd be pretty rough on them. And I don't think you want to leave them in a pasture with just twisted acacia, you know, for that reason, just because they like that one food. Flowers, the deer really like flowers, blackbrush flowers and other types. And in the spring they would really make use of those. But again, those flowers are only available for short periods of time. A lot of the mass species we talked are real sporadic, and so you could manage for prickly pear fruits, for example. The deer gobble them up when they're available, but those prickly pear fruits are only available for a few months every year, and they're relatively, in fact, they're very low in protein, so they're not a balanced diet in themselves, even though the deer really like them. And again, some of these other odd things that deer may eat, the snail shells and mouse skeletons and things like that, would be another thing, and particularly when conditions get real bad. One of our tame deer here on this picture on the left there is chewing on a deer skull. So again, trying to meet its needs using whatever it can at that time of year. So managing for diversity might make sense not only because it's difficult to select preferred species and because some of these highly preferred species are real seasonal, but sometimes, depending on environmental conditions, a lot of these preferred forages just may not be available. It's a real good study that was done up in the Cross Timbers region by Parks and Wildlife and Texas State biologists, where they went out and collected deer over a couple of year period. We've got one period here that was a dry year, and another period, and some of the axes didn't come through on this well, but was a wet period. The line that's shown on the graph here and the numbers above it is the percent browse in the diet over those two periods. So the percent browse was relatively high in that dry period on the left and dropped in the low period on the right. The reason it dropped is because this blue line that we now have on the graph is the Forbs. So Forbs were very low proportion of the diet in the dry period and rose up to 30 to 40% of the diet in the wet period. So you might say, deer were eating Forbs even in that dry period. You know, maybe we could really manage things where you could just have Forbs available. We'll pick some of those key Forbs and we'll just manage for those. This didn't come through here, but what would show on this slide is there's the top 6 Forbs in the diet in the dry period and the top 6 Forb species in the diet in the wet period. And those two lists are entirely different species. So the Forbs that were eaten in the dry period are entirely different species than the Forbs that were eaten in the wet period. So again, it'd be really hard to go back and choose a certain Forb to manage for example, because if you manage for the ones in the wet period, those wouldn't be available in the dry period and vice versa. Another example where where deer foraging habits and diversity can be particularly important. I think many of you may know in 2008 in March, the Chaparral Wildlife Management Area in South Texas had a big fire burn across it. It burned 90% of the area, and a lot of the area looked like what's shown in this picture here in the upper left. It was a dramatic burn. We went out and collected deer beginning in early April, so a couple weeks after the fire, and collected them through mid-June, shortly before they had, gave birth to their fawns, and looked at a variety of different things. But one of the things we looked at is what those deer were eating after this just really large wildfire. And it was amazing to us how versatile the deer were in this really desperate situation. If we start here in April, early April, the diet was made up 80 to 90% of burned cactus. Just like shown down here on the lower left, that fire actually made cactus much more available for the deer. And because of the management that had been done on the chap, managing for a lot of diversity, there was enough cactus there where the deer were able to meet those needs. As we move into May, the cactus began to drop out, and grass was part of the diet and really kind of continued throughout, which is the green bar kind of running through the middle of the graph. The yellow bar that begins to increase a lot in May and then start tapering off into June are dicots, which are Forbs and browse species. So with a little bit of rain that came in late April and early May, some of these things started leafing out, and the deer started making use of that. And then by June, late June, when we finished our sampling, the cactus that hadn't been severely burned and the mesquite that was leafing out again started producing pods and tunas, and there was some persimmons. There were a lot of persimmon fruits in the deer's diets, and so about 80% of the diet in June had switched over to these mast species. So despite this monstrous change in the environment, the deer were able to go out and find foods that enabled them to meet their needs. And through looking at body weights and the progression of gestation and things, the deer were able to meet their needs. We were able to document that. So, might come in and take just a little bit closer look at deer food habits, particularly here in South Texas, where I've gathered up some data. I found it was 20 or 30 different food habit studies that have been done over the years in South Texas, and we've got a graph here kind of showing averaging across all those, where we've got the diet of made up of about a third of browse, roughly a third of Forbs, varying a little bit through the year, maybe being higher in the spring, some mast, and the mast tends to increase a bit in the fall here. And then grass can be part of the diet, and in some parts maybe even 15 or 20% of the diet during the winter when it's real young and succulent, and then cactus and some other stuff. The reason I bring this up is the picture gets a little more interesting if instead of lumping all these studies across South Texas, we instead look at food habits in the western part of South Texas. And if you remember back to that graph where browse was about a third all year, Forbs were about a third, you get west of Highway 281 and the food habits are dramatically different. Some of these mast species can be very prominent in the summer and autumn. Forbs are important in the spring but almost go away in the summer, which in that hot, dry environment makes sense. Browse may largely go away in the diet in autumn. Cactus, a bigger part of the diet west of 281 than we saw overall. And we could bring up those studies just done in eastern South Texas. And again, a dramatically different picture where Forbs are a huge part of the diet. A lot of this work done on the Welder and some places like that over near the coast. So just even where you are in South Texas can really influence what is going to be deer food in your environment. So even though deer are selective, we talked about them being concentrate selectors, they're also extremely variable in their food habits depending on what is available, and depending, and that large part of that may depend on where you are in the state and what environmental conditions have been. Got one other idea I want to kind of share with you, and this is the idea that, we would think that deer would go out and eat the very best foods that are available for them at any one time. So they're going to eat the very highest foods, highest in energy and protein and things like that. A lot of times those real good forages are rare. and so the deer would eat lower quality forages. But we also see them eat lower quality forages at times even when supplemental feed is available. And this is a bit of a puzzle to us. It makes sense that they might eat, you know, some lower quality browse, for example, when there's just nothing else to eat. But even deer that have ad lib access to pelleted feed are still eating blackbrush and guajillo and some of these plants that chemically just don't seem like they're very good foods. And a reason for this might be that the deer are really kind of hardwired to have a varied diet. Even if a pelleted feed could meet all their needs, they're still going to go out and eat other foods. And there's a variety of reasons why they may do this. One is that they may go out and eat poor quality foods after eating pelleted feed, because that real high quality diet can cause some, potentially cause some kind of digestive upset and can make them kind of acidotic, is something that can happen on a real high quality diet for a rumen. So by going out and eating some poor quality foods with more fiber in them, the deer may be able to kind of counteract that real high quality diet. Some of these things that we've traditionally thought of as toxins, like tannins and some of these other things, may actually have some benefits. In human nutrition, we're beginning to understand some of the antioxidant properties and a variety of things like that. Some evidence that tannins may have some antiparasitic effects. So some domestic animals have been shown to be able to treat themselves by eating high tannin foods and thereby reducing internal parasites. Some of these things that we traditionally think of as toxins have some antimicrobial effects and could maybe promote some deer health as a result of that, and deer may be hardwired to do that, again, some of these antioxidant effects. And some of the high protein and energy in the supplemented diets may also need to be countered with some of these poor quality foods. So just to kind of recap real quick, deer need nutrients from their environment. Their nutrient requirements vary depending on the deer's age and sex and the season. The vegetation can vary, and deer's food habits are really tremendously flexible. And so really the one thing that makes sense to me to have all this come together in a management context is to provide the deer the diversity that they need to exist in this highly variable environment and meet their varying nutritional requirements. A whole variety of people help with some of the data that I've talked about here today. The tame deer research, got colleagues here in Kingsville and out on some of the ranches, Donnie Dreger in particular, and the Comanche Ranch, and been real instrumental in a lot of this, and the funders for that project. Chaparral Wildlife Management Area were great to work with, and after the fire went through, and so Parks and Wildlife needs to be acknowledged in their support for all this. And with that, I can go ahead and wrap up. The contact information is there. If you have additional questions that we can't get through today, I'd encourage you to either call or email me. I'd be happy to talk about them further. And we do have a website in which we post a lot of literature and presentations and things that we do here at the Cesar Kleberg Institute, so I encourage you to go to that too. Be happy to open it up for questions if we have time.
Dr. Hewitt, thank you so much. Folks, if you want, go ahead and start typing those questions in the chat window and send them to all participants, and we'll read through them and get them answered here. Just in the meantime, here is a link to the CKWRY Deer Research website. You can copy and paste that or click on it, and it'll take you directly to the website that Dr. Hewitt was just referencing. Let's see. Okay, the first question comes from David Rios, and he says, under what circumstances might it be necessary for a land manager to provide supplemental feed?
Yeah, and with supplemental feed being such a prominent management practice in Texas, we've spent some time trying to think about what that role of supplement may be in deer nutrition, and in some of our research, the supplement can make a huge difference, particularly in dry years in deer body growth and reproduction and antler size. And so I think if that's a technique that someone wants to use, there's a lot of evidence that it can be a benefit in our South Texas environment for sure. That having been said, there's still, through a variety of our projects, we still see deer productivity and body weights and fawn weights and all this type of stuff increase in areas where the native vegetation is good, even if supplemental feed is available. And so I think the way the deer probably look at the pelleted supplement is that it's another choice that they can mix into their diet to meet their needs. And there's times a year, you know, when Forbs are abundant, you know, for example, where the deer quit eating the feed or largely quit eating it. In other words, the Forbs, maybe they're more palatable, or maybe there's things in those Forbs that the deer have a drive to, you know, to really ingest that aren't part of the supplemental feed. And so if I was in a situation and was going to use supplemental feed, I would not use it as a sole food source. I would use it as a choice that the deer, like I said, can kind of mix in, so that when that supplement's able to meet a need that the native vegetation isn't, the deer can use it. And when the native vegetation, you know, is strong because of good management and good weather conditions and everything, the deer can use that to meet their needs.
Okay, great, thank you. And here's a two-part question. The first part is, since vegetation availability is constantly changing, and therefore also the CP and TDN, is there a need for supplementation with protein pellets, which provides a constant source of protein and energy, versus food plots that vary along with browse and CP and TDN?
Yeah, and that's one of the benefits of a pelleted feed, is you can control its availability and you can control its quality. A drawback of the pelleted approach to providing, you know, additional nutrients is that it's become increasingly apparent to us, again through some of our research projects, that the social hierarchies at these feed sites could really limit the animals that can gain access to that supplement. Through a variety of, on many different studies that we've done, the bucks, a lot higher proportion of the bucks are able to make use of these concentrated food resources. Does a lower percentage, and fawns actually are abysmally low. Some of that may be because of fences that need to be put up around these supplemental feed sites to keep non-target animals away. But even where fences aren't there, fawn use of these pelleted feed sites is much lower than it is for other older animals. And that could be a role that food plots could provide. Even though food plots aren't going to be available all year round, they may be able to be targeted in the, you know, the fall and the winter, particularly when these fawns are being weaned, and those fawns have high nutritional requirements. They've got a small rumen, so they need higher quality food than an adult deer does. And if they can't get access to that supplement, it's not doing them any good. And so that's one place where food plots could serve a role. But I fully agree with the you know, with the question that you can control the quality and keep it a lot more steady using pelleted feed than you could with a supplemental or a food plot approach.
Okay, and part two of that question is, if there are high levels of vegetative diversity providing necessary nutrients most of the year, is there still a need for supplementation through pellets and/or food plots?
I would say not, but what we run into in our, you know, Texas environment is when things are good, they're really good. You know, our deer habitat, well-managed habitat in our environment with rainfall will stand up to deer habitat anywhere in the nation. But when things are bad, it could be, you know, it could be miserable, and the deer are going to switch into kind of just a survival maintenance mode. And all these productive processes, you know, the body growth and the fawn production and the antler production, those are all going to be the things that are going to take a hit in those bad conditions. And so so that you can still obviously manage deer without a supplement of some sort in the program. But if you do have a supplement in the program, you know, all our data is suggesting that it can kind of take the bottoms out of some of those bad years. So it has a role, but it's not absolutely essential to, you know, to have a good productive deer management program.
Okay, and our next question says, Dr. Hewitt, are you saying that the deer do better in post-rut or pre-rut? Don't you think that the deer are under more stress and body conditions are in a poorer condition in the post-rut state versus the pre-rut condition, especially since they're not eating during the rut?
Yeah, that's a really good question, because, you know, the deer are big and fat and roly-poly coming into the rut. They need a lot of high quality and particularly a lot of energy to get to that state while they're entering the rut. then they use a lot of those resources during the rut, mainly by not eating, but also through increased activity and tending does and doing all that type of stuff. So they get to the post-rut and they are very definitely in much poorer condition. And most of the mortality of bucks happens after the rut. That post-rut is stressful not only nutritionally, but I'd be willing to bet because of the stress of the rut, not only the nutritional stress, but the social stress and all the things those animals are going through, it affects their immune system. There's a lot of kind of cascading effects that can result in this higher mortality after the rut. That having been said, you can take a buck after the rut, put all the good quality food you want in front of him, and he's not going to get roly-poly post-rut. He'll put some condition back on, but the deer are designed to really kind of be in a maintenance mode over winter. They're not geared up to be real productive at that time of year, so that buck isn't going to put on a whole bunch of muscle and a whole bunch of fat if you give him that food. He'll bring himself up to kind of some minimal condition and then ride out the rest of the winter. And then what happens is in the spring, or excuse me, in the summer, that's when they're going to start putting that condition on. And this time of year, they're really packing it on, and then getting ready for the next cycle of the rut. And part of that observation that I'm giving you comes from from our captive herd here on the Texas A&M Kingsville campus where we're studying deer nutrition, and we've got some deer that aren't on projects, for example. They're given ad lib food all year long, all they want to eat, pelleted food and hay, alfalfa hay and all, and these deer will show those same body cycles of getting fat in the fall, losing weight over the rut, and then staying relatively thin over the winter until they get to late spring and summer, and then they'll start putting weight on again. So the question is exactly right, that the bucks are in a lot worse shape and are going to be much more susceptible to mortality after the rut. But simply providing more and more food isn't necessarily going to change that. You do want to make sure there's good quality food out there where the bucks can make use of it if they need it, but they're not all going to get roly-poly as a result of doing that. I hope that helps.
Okay, great. Our next question is, are there feed varieties such as baled alfalfa that can cause digestive issues? I've been told providing alfalfa in areas where it is not a typical crop can cause microbial variations in the rumen and sicken deer.
Yeah, and I think where most of those types of ideas come from, ruminants can definitely get sick by eating too much of the wrong foods. So if you have a deer where it doesn't have other choices of food to eat and all you give it is corn, or you take a deer that's been on a very poor quality diet and you give it some really good alfalfa hay, they will experience some digestive upset. And what would typically happen when for a deer in that situation is they would quit eating that food that's making them sick. And if that's all they've got, they may really cut back on the amount they eat. So in a pen situation, those types of concerns are real, and you need to be pretty careful about what you're feeding and make sure the deer are doing okay on it. In a free-ranging situation where deer have this choice and all this diversity available, I don't think it's a concern at all. You can and people do feed corn ad lib in different places, not only in Texas, but even baiting in the upper Midwest, for example. They'll go put a dump truck load of corn on the ground, and there's not dead deer lying around from acidosis from the corn. The deer can kind of tell when they're going to start and when they start feeling bad, and they'll back off. And we've run into that even with some of our captive deer. Did some feeding trials with acorns years ago, and if we got over about 40% of their diet being made up of acorns, they just quit eating as much acorns. They just wouldn't eat anymore. And so as long as deer have choices, they can go out and select a diet that's going to keep from killing them. I mean, obviously deer, up in the hill country in a good acorn year can be swimming in acorns, and we don't find a bunch of dead deer as a result of this high quality food laying around. They can make a go of it, and alfalfa hay would be the same thing. You could, for free ranging deer, you could put out all the alfalfa hay you want, and the deer are going to eat as much as as they feel like is going to be they need to have as part of their diet. And then if it's too high quality, they're going to go out and they're going to eat some browse and they're going to eat some other stuff to try to dilute out that high quality.
All right, great. Our next question comes from Chris. He asks, what is your best advice to dealing with extreme habitat variations during the droughts? It seems quality habitat is only as good as the most recent rainfall.
Yep, by all means. Um, so this diversity idea, I think, can help provide some protection, because again, kind of like in that data set from the rolling plains, the types of foods the deer can use are going to vary from wet periods to dry periods. The dry periods, the foods that are going to be available are going to be poor quality. There's no doubt about it. And so that could be one place where a supplement program could help kind of even out those real low periods. Another thing would be to manage for an appropriate number of deer, so that even in the dry conditions, individual deer can find enough of the foods that they need to remain productive, and if things are really bad, at least remain alive. That having been said, I would be pretty hesitant on going out and reducing deer numbers simply because there's a drought. And I say that in that I would want to try to manage the herd so that maybe you're a bit understocked in the really good years, but you can maintain some of these adult deer through those bad years, so that when conditions get good again, you've got enough deer on the ground, enough adult deer that can put fawns on the ground where you can get the program up and running again pretty quick. These deer herds probably self-limit to some extent in that when it's really dry, no fawns are raised. You may have 5% fawn crops in real poor years, and that is essentially limiting the population growth in that dry year. As long as you didn't have an obnoxious high number of deer coming into that drought period, you could probably just back off on, just have no doe harvest, maybe back off a bit on the buck harvest and just let that population ride through the drought. And that can be a viable strategy, because a lot of our habitats here in South Texas, I would argue, have large amounts of kind of maintenance type food. If the brush communities are strong, and that food may not be sufficient for a lot of real good production of deer, but it's sufficient to keep these adult deer alive and healthy, where they can ride through the drought, and then they'll be ready to be productive once the rains come again.
Okay, our next question is, are aflatoxins of concern in supplemental feed, especially in dry years?
Yeah, it certainly can be. Ruminants, like deer, are less susceptible to aflatoxin than say a lot of the birds are. So quail and doves, providing corn or perhaps even pelleted feed, at those times could be a problem for the birds. The microbes in the rumen can help kind of protect the deer from some of the aflatoxin. That having been said, there could be a concern with fawns, because again, fawns are, if they're just being weaned, they've got a relatively undeveloped rumen, may not have the full microbial populations in there, and the food's going to move through quicker, giving the microbes less time to maybe detoxify some stuff. And so, yeah, so it very well could be a concern, and if I was in a position where I was providing supplement or especially corn, I would be sensitive to that issue and be trying as much as you can to be getting your supplement and corn from sources that are testing it, and then trying to feed it out quick enough that there isn't an opportunity for that aflatoxin to increase.
All right, and our next question is, assuming all things are equal between food plots and protein pellets, meaning that their nutrient levels and their availability is equal, which will be more readily consumed and provides more benefit to the deer, based specifically on deer browsing habits?
Yeah, and all things being equal, I think the food plots, particularly in the right vegetative state, are just going to be more palatable to the deer. And and like I said, when you get these kind of rainfall events and the forbs come up and everything, the deer vote with their feet. They quit eating pellets, and they'll go out and eat this vegetation that they're probably more adapted to using. And the food plots, even though it may look relatively homogeneous to us, there's going to be if it's cowpeas, for example, the leaves are going to be different nutrient quality than the stems, and some of the older stems are going to be even poorer quality than the younger stems, and even in some of the grass species, there can be a variety of qualities in there that the animals could make use of. And again, a pellet they're mixed in such a way that these supplements, every bite of the supplement's exactly the same as every other bite, and there's no ability for animals to get a little bit different diet depending on what their particular needs are at that time. So I think from a deer foraging standpoint, there'd be some real benefits in the food plot approach. The drawback of the food plots is it's very difficult to grow them in times when when they might do the most good in dry times. So that's a trade-off that, depending on conditions on any individual property, that landowner would need to make a decision about what's going to work for them on their particular ranch.
Okay, great. Folks, let's see, here's another question. Is there any need or benefit for probiotic supplementation through feed or water for increased rumen health in free-ranging deer?
I'm not aware of any indication that there's some benefits in that, and I think the deer are continually inoculating themselves with new bugs as they're eating and getting those from the environment, and the microbes in the rumen change. Those microbial populations and the mix of them can change depending on the predominant foods in the diet, and as long as diets don't change very quickly, so if there's high quality Forbs coming in the diet, they're coming in, relatively slowly over a few day period and things like that, then the microbes can have chances to adjust to those. So I'm not aware of any evidence where the probiotics would make a large difference, but again, I don't think it's really been investigated. So there may be some some benefit out there that I'm not aware of has been demonstrated yet.
Okay, and our next question is from a gentleman who had a fire come through and burned his ranch, and he didn't get any rain until late summer or early fall, and the Forbs have gone crazy, and so this year the deer look amazing now in both antler growth and body size, and he would like to know if this is due to the genetics of the deer or just the late blooming Forbs.
Yeah, I'd chalk that all up to the late blooming Forbs, because the deer genetics didn't change from before the fire to after the fire. So if the deer look different than they did before the fire, then there's not a genetic change there, and that flush of Forbs, even though it might not have helped antler growth or fawn production, for example, because the summer was dry, but deer can get nice and roly-poly fat this time of year if the right foods are available, and that a flush of Forbs after a fire is about as good a conditions as you can imagine. So I'd chalk it up to the Forbs.
Okay, and our last question comes from Omar, who would like to know if supplemental feeding has been found to help increase antler growth compared to ranches with non-feeding protein. And if so, what's the best time to start feeding for antler growth?
Yeah, so we've been involved in a couple of different studies that does show an increase in antler size of deer using pellets, supplemental feed, compared to deer that aren't, and that we've had that kind of demonstrated on individual ranches where we could tell which deer eat and feed and which deer aren't, and then also in some of this work out by Carrizo Springs that I mentioned, where we've got deer in some enclosures that have supplemental feed and other deer right next to them in enclosures that don't have supplemental feed, and we see antler responses there. So yes, on average, overall, kind of averaging across the good years and the bad years, supplemental feed will increase antler size in our environment. In terms of when to offer it, you could make an argument for the nutritional effect being important at different times, bringing them through the rut in decent shape, the spring when the antlers are starting to grow, the summer when they're really growing hard, real fast, and then maybe late summer when they're hardening out. You could see importance of nutrition all that time. Going into the rut big and happy and fat may be better than going in kind of skinny in terms of the antler growth the following year. So if I was able to, I would try to provide that supplement year-round so that, again, it's just another choice for the deer. And if conditions are good, the deer won't eat it much. If conditions are bad and the deer really feel like they need it, they'll use it. If you had to, weren't in a position to feed year-round, I think I would probably focus on a period, maybe March, starting in there, February, March, right before antlers are dropped, to start getting the deer in good condition, tell their body that, hey, conditions are good, and so if the deer's making a physiologic decision on what to put into antlers, it's already feeling like conditions are good, so that when that antler growth starts in April, they'll kick it off. And I would try to keep that supplemental feed program going through the summer so that the whole antler growing period is as strong as possible.
Okay, and our next question is, what was the intake of protein on a per head basis on the supplemental feed studies you've done?
That is a remarkably difficult piece of information to get at. We've got some techniques that you can use to tell if deer have eaten feed or not, and that seems pretty simple. We've got some techniques to tell what proportion of the diet is supplemental feed, and that's more difficult, but like I said, it's doable. But and you can use that to tell how much food, pelleted feed, a deer has eaten if you assume that a deer eats a certain amount of food per day. So if we just say that a deer eats, let's say 4 pounds of food a day, 4 pounds of dry matter a day, and our techniques tell us that half of the food that a deer eats is pelleted, we'd estimate that they're eating about 2 pounds of food per day per deer. But you need to make some assumptions to go take that approach. The times that we've been looking at the percent of diet made up of supplemental feed, it's usually varying between 30 and say 60, maybe 70% on average. Some deer more, some deer less. So if you take an average maybe of half of their diet, again being pelleted feed, and 4 or 5 pounds of dry matter a day, then that would equate to 2 to 3 pounds of pelleted feed a day.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Hewitt. It looks like that answers all of our questions. There was a question about getting this presentation, the audio for this presentation, and I'm going to put a link up right now. There's all of the Wildlife for Lunch series is recorded, and the archive versions are available on the TWA website, and there's a link to it right there. And this archived webinar will be available sometime next week once we get the edited version in there. And of course, you'll be able to watch it, the video and the audio for the entire thing, in the question and answer session as well. So for anyone who's interested, please check back next week and view the archive version. Dr. Hewitt, I just want to say thank you so much for your presentation on behalf of TWA and the Texas A&M AgriLife Extension. We just really appreciate your expertise and your knowledge and you coming and sharing that with us. Folks, the next Wildlife for Lunch webinar is going to be on October 18th, and we're going to have Forrest Smith talking about native prairie restoration. So we encourage everyone to tune back in then and join us. And with that, we'll just go ahead and say thanks to all of the participants for being here today. We really appreciate y'all's support of Wildlife for Lunch and look forward to having you on the next one.
Thank you, Courtney, and thank you, everybody, for your interest.